Hi and welcome to my vlogging series where I talk about whatever I feel like grumbling about at the time. And had a little comment on a video saying may I request something on Brexit. Well, obviously this is the madness of our time, so I will do my best to go through a few bits. Now it's a huge topic, of course, and I could go on for hours on this, but I've tried to sort of condense it down to 5 things that sort of came to mind here. The first one, or the first 2 really, are about potential reasons why people voted for it. The problem was, of course, we had this referendum to decide whether we should pull out the EU or not. There was lots of people campaigning for various reasons why we should stay in, why we shouldn't stay in. And then at the end of it, when it turned out that the referendum result was a very, very minor vote to pull out, everyone who voted to pull out of it was saying, oh yeah, everyone who voted for this reason and therefore this is what we should do. And that's what people keep saying. Oh, the people voted for this and this is what we should do, which is absolute rubbish, of course. And the first one is the nonsense of immigration. So a lot of fear was stoked up about immigration, the problems of immigration, borders completely out of control, all the rest of it. And this is a nonsense for a couple of reasons. The first reason is our borders will actually become more leaky as a result of exiting the EU. Because as part of the EU, of course, all the individual member states of the EU are responsible for ensuring that migration from outside of the EU is controlled. So, for example, France has a duty to prevent illegal immigrants passing through across the channel into Britain. That will go away. There's no, people keep talking about, oh, we can still have that agreement. Yeah, we still legally could have that agreement, but why would France bother? What's in it for them? Unless we pay them a load of money, nothing, not a thing. So that creates a bigger problem. And that is if we do have a problem with immigration in this country, and of course that's, whether there's even a problem with it as a subject on its own, the problem is from people outside the EU. People within the EU travelling to this country and working, there's no big deal there. People could say, use the, stealing our jobs argument. Not stealing anything. If you've got someone coming to this country, their English may not be that great, might be okay. What advantage have they got against someone who was born and raised in Britain getting a job? None at all. In fact, there's more hassle because there's more documentation needed and all the rest of it to prove that they've been a resident in the EU for the last few years, and therefore have a right to stay and work and all the rest of it. The reason is because either they're doing jobs for which we don't have the skills or enough skills in this country. In the UK, we are desperately short of engineers, for example. We have massive lack of any sensible number of skilled engineers. We're hemorrhaging them. And then there's the other end of the scale, which is the low skilled but really hard work, going out in the fields and picking vegetables all day long. And again, what's noticed, I saw a television crew go out there and they actually got some British teenagers to try that work out, and they were so slow and they found it such hard work and they didn't want to do it again. And that's again the sort of work we're going to miss out on because, people in this country, let's face it, are fundamentally lazy. And I'm not saying that's a nice job. I'm not saying I would want to do that job. I wouldn't at all. But it's a job that's on offer that's been done by people coming from countries where actually if you come over here the money's better. And we're not grateful for that. We're actually saying that's a disadvantage. Well, we're soon going to find that there were certain advantages when the cost of produce suddenly goes up. So yeah, the nonsense of immigration there, as I say, any little problems with immigration that we have are illegal immigration, and by definition that's people from outside of the EU. And that's just going to get worse because, the way to improve that is to put more money into border control, but we don't. Put less into it. Then the next one is the nonsense of outside rules. This idea, we don't want things decided in this parliament in Brussels. We don't want things decided out there. The British government should be able to make its own decisions about Britain. And it's a nonsense. Again, there's 2 reasons for that. One is that a lot of British lawmakers come up with these rules in the first place. But the second reason is, who says that the British government has our best interests at heart? I'll be honest, a lot of the judgments from the European courts look like they've got our back much better than our own British government. But it's this same philosophy that people have, a government that's close to home is gonna be on our side, but it's not true. And this is the reason why, in the UK particularly, you've got people who want to split off. You want people who want Scotland to be independent because we should have our own government making our own decisions for the best interests of Scotland. Whereas that's not true, because where's this going to be based? Based in Edinburgh, say? Okay, it might be useful for people living in Edinburgh. Maybe it'd be useful for people in Glasgow as well, the two big cities there. The further out you go, the more rural areas you go. Is it representing you? No, it's not. No, it's not. It doesn't matter how much you break a country down. The government ultimately is not representing everyone. It's representing what it thinks it should represent. And the same with the British government there. Okay, it might be very useful for people in London. May or may not, depends on your point of view. But it doesn't, I mean, for where I am, much further north, I don't feel that there's any great representation by the British government at all. I feel much more that the European legislature is much more on my side. So, there's a bit of an issue around there. Again, lots of people playing on people's fears with that. Keep the outsiders out, ultimately, is what it comes down to. And it's a fundamentally self-destructive attitude. But those are the attitudes. So then we come on to the downright lie, because that's a matter of opinion. So then there was downright lies told in the referendum. And also, it's worth mentioning at this point that this chap here, Nigel Farage, which a lot of people outside of Britain, in America in particular, think that he's a politician. It's worth bearing in mind, and this comes as a surprise to a lot of Americans, this man has never won elected office in the UK. Ever. He's not now or has ever been someone who has won an election in the UK. He has been voted into office in Europe, ironically. He's an MEP, which was voted for by British people. He's part of the British contingent. And this is another reason why when people feel there's a disconnect between Britain and the EU, there's two reasons for that. First of all, the EU ultimately came about to try and prevent further war in Europe. At the time, Europe had gone through 2 world wars, but it was basically mostly centred around European powers. And people didn't want to live through that again. And so that's, although it's become now a big economical thing and legal, it's all about harmonising between those countries so that there's no reason to go to war with each other again. Now, in Britain, we don't quite have the same view. And the reason for that is we're basically the only country in Europe that hasn't been invaded in living memory. We repelled an invasion in the Second World War. So we weren't actually invaded. But we're the only ones who weren't. So we don't have that same fear. But then the other side of it is, so we have this disconnect because what a lot of people have done is we get to send people to the European Parliament and they get to have their say on laws. But we send a load of people like Nigel Farage who go there just to cause trouble. So they're not fighting for Britain's cause. So then is it any surprise that, again, there's that disconnect there because not everyone, but a certain number of the people we've sent over there to fight Britain's corner are not doing so. They're just there to cause trouble. And he's one of them. And he, tells downright lies as well. He once described the European Union as being on the side of big business and against people. But then he also said on another time that it was against big business. He's one of these people who will say black is white to one group and just to get them believing what he's saying, because he'll say what they want to hear. What is their primal fear? What's their big fear? And then he'll say that the thing he wants to remove himself from, the EU in this case, is the source of that fear. And he'll contradict himself no end of times. Doesn't matter at all. For example, before the referendum, he was saying, when we pull out the EU, there's no reason why we can't stay in the single market, because that's the biggest thing that's going to screw us over. And yet after the referendum, he says, well, we must pull out the single market because, that's what people voted for. It's like, so a day ago, you were saying we don't have to pull out the single market. And then, after the referendum, you saw the result. All of a sudden we do. What's that about? Also interesting to note that he's not going to be living in Britain anyway. He's going to be living in the European Union, ironically, because his wife is European. And he's just going to be moving there anyway. So it's like, oh, I've screwed you over. I'm moving. I'm off. So they're not even going to stay in the country. Absolute madness. But then there was also a thing, because it wasn't just about Nigel Farage and his UK Independence Party. There was also the Conservative Party, the current government. Some, senior members in it were parading around a battle bus that had a promise, for example, the European Union is costing us this amount and we could be giving it to the NHS. And that was particularly disgraceful in my view, because first of all, it's not true. What they were doing is working out the total amount of money, and even then it was subject to, doubt. But they were trying to work out the total amount of money we sort of give to the EU. But what they're not taking into account is the money we get back from it as well. The way I likened it at the time is it's a bit like you've got a job. Okay, so let's say you've got a job for which you're paid after taxes and everything like that. Let's say £1,500 a year. But it's some distance away. It's in the next town, so you've got to travel there. And it costs you about £100 in petrol a month, let's say. So you're getting £1,500 after taxes a month, but you're paying out £100 in petrol. It's a bit like you saying, I should quit my job so that I can save the £100 on petrol. That's exactly what it was like, because they weren't taking into account all the money in terms of trade and actually, money that comes directly back to us to support projects in the UK. There are places in the UK that get European money to regenerate areas. The British government isn't doing anything about these areas. And some of those areas, ironically, were places that overall voted for Brexit and are going to actually... that's the maddening thing. A lot of the people that voted for Brexit are going to be the hardest hit by all this. So there was some downright lies told. And it's a downright lie that's been told when the Office for National Statistics in this country calls them out on it. Because obviously we know that politicians mash our figures and they present them in misleading ways all the time. So people do that statistics all the time because most people, let's face it, do not understand statistics. Statistics, can't even say the bloody word. It is a complex subject. I'm sort of from a mathematical background, and it's very, very easy to fool people with stats because people don't have that same level of training. They don't understand. It's very easy to show someone something and they think, cause and effect is proved by a correlation, say. So they usually get away with that because they're not saying anything factually wrong. But when the Office for National Statistics points at you and says, actually, that's factually wrong, that's when you're just downright lying. And they've done that a number of times. And the issue again with this is all those promises that were made, and this is the British public's fault really for believing such lies. All those promises that were made by people who are not in power. So it's a bit like, believing an election pledge from a party that isn't even fielding any candidates. There was no way any of these lies could ever come to pass, even if it were economically possible, which it was not, because the people making these promises were not in a position to be able to act on them. So there were an awful lot of those lies as well. And this is the reason why, obviously we're very distrustful of opinion polls at the moment, because they've tended to go a little bit squiffy the last few elections. I think partly that's because the demographic of people who have been voting has been changing. I think we have been getting more younger people voting, and the more we can get of that, the better as well. But, I think there is a strong feeling that, let's say, because people, some people calling for a re-vote on a referendum. Obviously, if you're on the losing side, as I was, then you would want that. But a better system is one where we are supposed to get a vote on the final deal. So it's like, we've gone through the process, the final deal is here. This is what we can have. And put that to a vote. Now, the government did promise to give a parliament a final vote. But what they've said is that vote may not take place before we leave. Well, that's a bit like asking someone to vote. If voting in an election of any kind means you want to have your say. It's a bit like, a talent contest where you phone your vote in. It's a bit like saying to someone that they can still phone their vote in a day after the decision has been made and the winner has been announced. It was like, well, what's the point? My vote isn't counting for anything. And that's the same thing here. If you give Parliament a vote on the final deal after it's been enacted and we've left and we've committed, then what's the point in even having the vote if the House votes against it? Well, what are they going to do? That's it. That's the deal. There is no more. It's madness. And in fact, there is a feeling that if a vote went to the people to say, not as a revote, that would be quite bad, but as a, right, this is the deal we've got. Do you want to accept this and we leave? Or do you want to say, actually, no, staying would be better than this deal and we cancel it and we stay in the EU? That's what should happen. But that's not what's going to happen. And what's baffling for me is the current Prime Minister is someone who campaigned against leaving. And the other strange thing, I mean, this came from the last Prime Minister, David Cameron, who's a bit of a bonehead anyway. But ironically, I mean, he didn't want this either. It was madness to me that he even allowed a referendum. But the irony was he allowed the referendum to prevent his party splitting, because his party, the Conservative Party, current government, and they're the government most of the time, it has to be said, are very split between, they have a lot of people that are very pro-European, and they have a lot of people that are super anti-European, and they both hold those views very, very strongly. It's the polar opposites. And he allowed the referendum. In his mind, it would draw a line to the whole thing. Whoever won, that would be it. But of course, that's not it. The party is splitting like you wouldn't believe. It's because they're not things for which you can find a compromise. There is no compromise possible with something like this. You're either in the European Union or you're outside of it. And then the being outside of it as well, I mean, the other nonsense is people saying, well, that leaves us free to be able to make our own trade deals. And again, this is a nonsense and has been shown to be a nonsense. It's a nonsense there's a few reasons I can throw into here. One, countries are not exactly queuing up to do business with us. We've sent ministers all around the world trying to preemptively sort of talk about the sort of deals we can get. We haven't got any. The only one who's even talked about us getting a great deal is Donald Trump. Everything's great with Donald Trump. But the problem is, of course, Donald Trump's watchword, what is it? Make America great again. It's all about the American deal. It will be a great deal for America. It'll be a terrible deal for us. And I fear that will happen, because ordinarily you'd think to yourself, well, our negotiators surely will have some common sense, and they will, because they'll not be politicians, they'll be civil servants who know what they're doing. And they'll go there and they'll know the deal is bad, but the politicians will make them accept it. Because those politicians need to be able to go to the media and say, we've got a deal. It'll be a terrible deal for us. A lot of people fear it's basically going to involve American companies basically buying the NHS. And it'll be a disgrace then if it's even allowed to still be called the NHS. It's already far too privatised to be worth the name, if you ask me. But, whatever the deal is, because they know we'll be desperate, in any negotiation, if one side's desperate and the other side knows it, who's going to get the best deal there? It's not going to be mutually beneficial. There's no chance of that. And the other side of it is this. Again, how are we going to get a good deal with other countries that are also trading with the EU? And the EU is a bigger trading partner for those other countries than we are. The EU, again, will always get the best deal. And then another thing, again, coming back to Donald Trump. So he's started off a bit of a trade war at the moment. It's sort of in its early stages. It's not a full-blown trade war just yet. But he's slapped some tariffs on Chinese goods, and China's slapped some tariffs on American goods. The funniest thing that came out of that, by the way, and I thought it was hilarious, was as a result of this, it means it's now cheaper for China to buy it's only minor, but pistachio nuts, they were buying them from the United States, but because of the tariffs that China have put in retaliation, it's now cheaper to get them from Iran. So at the moment, I'm not saying that they shouldn't, I'm not saying Donald Trump shouldn't have done what he's done in this particular case. I'm not going to get involved in trade issues, but it's quite funny that at the moment, as a direct result of this, Iran is actually the winner on pistachio nuts, at least. But that's great, because Iran's one of America's staunchest allies, really. But anyway, he also said another. So he was saying that it was impossible to get a good deal with the European Union. He said it's impossible to get, and that's him basically. He was saying it as if something fundamentally wrong with the European Union. But no, what that actually means is, because he sets himself up as his adversary, that means the EU is actually a very, very powerful negotiator. You notice, for example, that although there were threats of tariffs on EU goods, none appeared, because even he has had to acknowledge that he would not win a trade war there. So what we're now talking about is we're talking about leaving effective negotiators. He has basically acknowledged that the EU are effective trade negotiators, and we want to leave that club, and we think we can get a better deal on our own. It's absolute nonsense. Who the hell ever believes that you can get a better deal, that anyone is stronger on their own? Especially in Britain. In Britain, like our most popular sports are all team sports. How would it be as an analogy if you were to say, okay, we'll get our best player to play on their own against 11 people on the other side? How does that work? It doesn't at all. So anyway, those are some of the main points about Brexit as I see it there. Do you know what it is? It just does feel like you're just rolling down in a car with no brakes towards a cliff edge, and you just know there's nothing going to stop you. It does, and it's an absolute disaster. And every time the media tries to present it as, oh, you know, it's not as bad as we think, and people were sort of saying doom and gloom, and it hasn't actually transpired yet. Well, it sort of has, and bear in mind we're still in the EU. And we're already suffering economically as a result of it. And it's not a global thing anymore, the fact that our economy is stalled, because there are European countries whose economy is marching on. France and Germany are not doing too badly at all. And of course, we also know that we're going to be losing one of our biggest exporters, our banking services. You know, they're already moving to the continent. So there you go. Those are my thoughts on Brexit. If there's any specific thoughts that people wanted, then put those in below. But in general terms, that's my view on Brexit at the moment. That's where we seem to be. And, you know, I suppose we have to wait another year just to see exactly what the real situation will be. And then maybe 2 or 3 years before everyone comes to their senses, if it is allowed to go over the cliff edge there. Because technically, once you've gone over the cliff edge, you're still not dead, are you? You've still got to hit the ground or the water below. And that may take some years. I mean, it's one of those things, again, I don't want to overstate it, because, you know, in 20, 30 years, we'll have sort of reshuffled our place in the world. But will that place in the world be as high as it is now? Probably not. I mean, it's easy to think. I mean, a lot of countries might think that if they're in a strong position, they've got a strong economy, that it'll last forever. Of course it won't last forever. There's been plenty of countries in the past that have had strong economies, and now it's not. You know, and countries wax and wane, you know, they rise and fall. We've already been in decline anyway, but, you know, you go from owning a quarter of the planet, then obviously you can't be anything other than on decline. But, you know, it looks like it's going to be a rapid descent at the moment. So those are my thoughts, final thoughts. Let me know what you think in the comments below. Like and subscribe if you want more of this sort of rambling content. And until next time, I'll see you later.